Hello, this is SR. Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. All the characters in this story are over 18 years old. Family is a source of strength. When everything is falling apart, it is your family that you can rely on, and they will support you. I've always believed that. Family was the most important foundation of my early life, and when serious upheavals occurred later in my life, it was family that became my support and refuge from the storms of life. When my father got cancer, it was hard for me. It was a battle that exhausted the heart, mind, and body of not only him, but also my mom, me, and my sisters. And although he eventually died of illness, we stood together. The same thing happened a few years later with my mom. Fortunately, everything happened quickly this time, but my sisters and I leaned on each other again, becoming stronger and closer, no matter what. Almost a year ago, there was another coup. After my mom died, we all continued to live together in our childhood home, but now our family and source of strength have been reduced to 3 people, a brother and 2 sisters. My older sister Karen was 26 years old, and she appointed herself the leader of our group. I'm 23 years old, I'm the middle brother, and my younger sister Lindsay just turned 18. It all started when Lindsay came home one afternoon in tears. Karen and I have noticed that over the past couple of weeks she has become increasingly anxious and withdrawn, but it seems that now there is some kind of turning point. She was sitting in the living room with her head in her hands, sobbing. Her shoulders shook with every ragged breath. Karen sat down next to her, put her arm around her shoulders, and pulled her close. Lindsay turned and pressed her face against Karen's shoulder, still crying. I slowly sat down on the other side of her and began to gently stroke her back. I couldn't help but remember a lot of similar scenes in those dark times when we lost our parents. None of us said a word. We just stayed close, letting her know that she is loved and she is not alone. Eventually, she calmed down and freed herself from Karen's embrace. She wiped her eyes and looked at us sheepishly. No one likes to lose control of themselves in front of others, no matter how close you are. Taking a deep breath, she told us the news. A stunning piece of news that will soon change our whole lives. She was pregnant. She had suspected this for 2 weeks, but it had just been confirmed. 100% confidence. It was a shock, of course, but that wasn't the end of her news. She definitely hadn't planned for something like this to happen, but she was actually excited and resigned to the idea. However, she broke the news to her boyfriend this afternoon, and he had a completely different reaction. First, he categorically demanded that she have an abortion immediately. In her opinion, this option was not considered. She wanted to keep the baby. Then he resorted to threats, saying that he would deny his involvement. He even threatened to harm her if she told anyone. She was devastated. We were all stunned. We actually liked this guy, and we thought he was a good, honest, and reliable guy. How things are changing. He told her that he didn't want to see her anymore and didn't want to hear anything about her. At that moment, she started crying again and turned to Karen, who hugged her and stroked her hair. It's going to be a difficult situation, but we'll handle it together, like we handle everything in the world. She'll probably have to put off going to college for at least a year, but that's okay. Since all 3 of us lived together in a house that was paid for, our expenses were low. Karen and I both worked, and we could provide for Lindsay during her pregnancy and make sure she gets on the right track. We told her about it, and despite the fact that the shock and bitterness of the day's events still weighed heavily on her, she seemed to cheer up. Over the next few months, things mostly stayed the same. There were 4 bedrooms in our house, so we decided to turn the 4th into a nursery. It was an amazingly happy time for all of us. We felt that the whole family, not just Lindsay, was going to have a baby. We talked about the future every night. We would love this child so much. Mom, aunt, uncle. It wasn't the most traditional house, but it was better than many others. We went shopping together for children's clothes, a crib, toys, books. We sat and read a book with children's names and argued about our loved ones. Lindsay always had someone at the reception, either Karen or me. The doctors got to know all of us and provided incredible support in our situation. In the 8th month of pregnancy, everything became a little more real. Lindsay has always been a petite girl. At the age of 18, when she became pregnant, she was 155 centimeters tall and weighed about 50 kilograms. She had long blonde hair that fell to her shoulders and a thick, athletic build. Now, about 8 months pregnant, she has become a different person. She gained about 20 kilograms, and almost all of them were on her huge belly. Moreover, she looked extremely awkward. Her back hurt when she got up or walked. It was difficult for her to take a comfortable sitting position. She even found it difficult to get out of bed in the morning. Karen and I helped as much as we could and tried to support her as much as possible, but it was getting harder as she became more irritable. We all hoped that the baby would be born prematurely. At 8 months old, she seemed ready to give birth. Day after day, we were preparing to go to the hospital. We were ready to be woken up at any time of the day. We knew it couldn't go on like this. And yet, despite all our hopes and wishes, the pregnancy went on day after day, week after week. When we reached the 9-month milestone, Lindsay became ridiculously large. She got into the habit of putting ice packs on her nipples because they were very painful and hypersensitive. Her belly was like a globe, and watching her walk was like watching a globe trying to walk. Her nerves were on edge, and she was happy, angry, crying, and back again. We all tiptoed around her and prayed that the end would come soon. The 40-week deadline has come to an end. We were all convinced that she should have given birth a few weeks ago. We were in our 42nd week now, and we weren't going to stop. Unfortunately, since we were all convinced that everything would be over by this time, Karen agreed to a week-long job outside the city. We assumed that Lindsay and I would change diapers ourselves and everything would be fine, but now the bulk of the responsibility will fall on my shoulders. Take her to the hospital, be with her during childbirth, arrange all the documents, insurance, and all other details that may arise. Early Monday morning, I drove Karen to the airport and then returned home to pick up Lindsay and take her to her last doctor's appointment. I helped her get to the car, sat her down on the seat, and somehow managed to fasten her seatbelt. All this time she was snapping at how rude and inconsiderate I was. I didn't see it, but I let her take out her anger on me. On the way to the doctor, the radio was too loud, the air conditioner was too cold, the sun was too bright. I drove the car too slowly and recklessly. I knew she was going through something I couldn't even imagine, so I just shut up and drove as smoothly as I could. As soon as we arrived at the doctor's office, I helped her out of the car and go inside. They had free wheelchairs, but she was too proud to use them. After we took the elevator and found ourselves in the waiting room, we had to wait another 40 minutes until we finally entered. When they called her name, I got up to see her off, and she turned around abruptly and looked at me. I was confused, as I had already gone to the doctor with her many times. However, this time she was adamant that she didn't need me. I shrugged and sat down to wait again. It took a full hour before the door opened and I saw Lindsay return to the waiting room. She didn't look happy, and I didn't press her. I just helped her back into the car, and we went home. I wanted to know what it was about. I knew she was going to ask about what she was being forced to do, but she made no attempt to bring me up to speed, and I didn't want to be told off again, so I just drove. Not a word was spoken in the car during the entire trip, and as soon as we got home, she immediately went to her room and closed the door. I chalked it up to another hormone intake during pregnancy and decided that she would tell me everything I needed to know when I needed it. It turned out that this would happen in less than an hour. I was in my room and working at my computer, with my back to the door, when I heard a light knock and then the sound of the door opening. I turned around when she entered my bedroom. She was looking at the floor or, most likely, at her stomach. She folded her hands in front of her. I asked carefully if everything was okay. She just nodded and continued to stand in place. I was waiting. Finally, she raised her head and I saw tears in her eyes. She said she was sorry and burst into tears. I jumped up and crossed the room to her, sat her down on the edge of the bed and hugged her. I told her that everything was more than fine. I didn't mind and understood that she was coping with an unbearable situation. She nodded, and when I hugged her tightly, she finally stopped crying and looked into my eyes. Then I asked her what the doctor had said. I asked if they had talked about inducing labor. She shook her head and looked like she was about to burst into tears again. They said that the baby is healthy and will be born any day now. They said the same thing last week and the week before that. They don't want to do artificial labor because of the possible side effects. They told me to just wait, but I can't," she said and burst into tears again. I held her closer to me and stroked her hair. "There must be something that can be done to speed up the process," I suggested. At these words, she nodded again and looked into my eyes again. I saw something. Hope? Unwillingness? I couldn't figure out what it was. When she looked down again, she told me that the doctor had actually told her something that would probably cause contractions. The probability of success was 90%. "This is fantastic." I blurted out, "What's the matter?" "Let's do it today." She stared at me for a long time before looking away and lowering her eyes again. "What is it?" I asked again. She remained silent. "Lindsay, what's the matter?" I asked again. "You'll think I'm crazy. And you're probably going to be mad at me," she said. I took her by the shoulders and took her at arm's length to look into her eyes. "Listen, no judgment. I know you're not crazy. There's nothing that could make me mad at you. I love you, and I will do anything for you," I said. Her eyes filled with tears again, and then she hugged me as tightly as her bulging belly would allow. She put her head on my shoulder and started talking. Maybe it was easier than looking me in the eye, while she was saying what needed to be said. "The doctor told me that there are a few things that help a little. Long walks, spicy food. But they are not so reliable. But he told me that there is something that is almost guaranteed to help immediately. He said the reason I didn't go into labor was probably because I hadn't done it all this time." As I listened, I couldn't figure out what she was talking about. "We've all read books. What did we miss?" And then she detonated the bomb. "He said I needed to make love. There's something about the hormones that are released, and the pressure, and something else. That's why I was so upset when we left, because I didn't have anything that could help me. But then I started thinking that maybe." She paused. Now I understood what she was getting at, but I still couldn't believe it. She sat in silence for what seemed like a very long time until she spoke again, this time much quieter, almost in a wisp-silisty. I couldn't figure out what she was talking about. "We've all read books. What did we miss?" And then she detonated the bomb. "He said I needed to make love. There's something about the hormones that are released, and the pressure, and something else. That's why I was so upset when we left, because I didn't have anything that could help me. But then I started thinking that maybe." She paused. Now I understood what she was getting at, but I still couldn't believe it. She sat in silence for what seemed like a very long time until she spoke again, this time much quieter, almost in a whisper. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. Don't hate me." I pulled away from her again so she could see my eyes. "Oh, Lindsay," I began. "I don't hate you. I'm surprised, that's all. If that's what you need, then of course I'll do anything." She looked up at me again, as if searching for something. "Are you sure?" "What is it?" she asked. "Are you sure?" I asked in response. She nodded vigorously and started laughing. She told me that it didn't mean anything and that I should treat it like a medical procedure. I nodded, but then I thought a little more. "Actually, Lindsay, I do not know if this will work. I don't think I could turn off my mind and just do things like that. For this to work, I need to be active, which means that everything has to be real. Are you sure you're okay with all this?" I asked. She nodded again. "Of course. I just thought you might be sure. I just thought you might be shocked. But trust me, I want this as much as ever and I'm going to be totally passionate about it," she said. I already had a hard-on when we started talking about it, but I wanted to clarify something else. "It means we're going to have foreplay." With these words, she dispelled all my doubts by bending down and cupping my face. I was not ready and even jumped a little. She pulled back and laughed. It was incredibly sweet. I pulled her back to me for a kiss, and this time I was ready for it. I stopped for a moment to admire me, pulled her back to me for a kiss, and this time I was ready opt for a moment to admire my pregnant sister sitting on the bed in front of me. Her skin was flawless, milky white, except for pink, a real as the size of silver dollars. This girl has grown up quickly. I got up and picked her up from the bed. When she got up, I knelt down, put my hand under her big belly and behind her back. I got up and led her to the bed. I pushed her from behind and she climbed onto the mattress. Gradually we stopped moving and I just knelt down behind her. Her face was flushed and sweaty. Her eyes were shining and her breath was hot as I lay down next to her on the bed. I reached out and put my hand under her head, just lying next to her, enjoying her warmth and the waves of pleasure we had just experienced together. My little sister, this beautiful expectant mother. It was at that moment that a revelation came to me. I was in love with her. I always knew I loved her. We loved each other, but now I realized that it had grown into something more. It may have been the catalyst that brought these feelings to the surface, but there was something deeper at the heart of it all. I knew that this could not be a one-time experience that would help her start childbirth. I was sure that this was just the beginning of a long and passionate love. I knew most people wouldn't approve of it because we were brother and sister, but I didn't care. The only problem may be caring. She'll be gone for a few more days, and that will give Lindsay and me more time to enjoy each other, but she'll be back. Exactly how things will change. Would she understand? The only problem may be caring. She'll be gone for a few more days, and that will give Lindsay and me more time to enjoy each other, but she'll be back. Exactly how things will change. Would she understand? Would she freak out? Would she have tried to stop us? That's when I realized that I love Karen no less, and I had an irresistible desire to be with her the same way I had just been with Lindsay. I also wanted to make love to my older sister just as much. I wanted to taste her and feel her body. I wanted to be inside her and look into her eyes when we reached the heights of pleasure together. I wanted to make her happy. I couldn't lose any of them. It was then that I made the decision that, no matter what, I would find a way to keep the three of us together. We were a family. We were about to have a baby. I turned around and looked into Lindsay's eyes. Her breathing steadied, and she looked at me for a long moment, in which I saw satisfaction. Then she leaned over and kissed me. It was slow and gentle. While our lips were pressed together, I reached out and gently stroked her cheek, brushing away a stray strand of hair around and looked into Tsay's eyes. Her wrathing steadied, and she looked at me for a long moment, in which I saw satisfaction. Then she leaned over and kissed me. It was slow and Eventually, we got out of bed. She went to the bathroom, and a few minutes later I heard the sound of running water in the shower. I thought about joining her in the shower, but to be honest, I thought there probably wouldn't be enough room, and I didn't want to inconvenience her. I left her room and walked down the hall to the small bathroom, where I washed up as best I could. I washed my hands and face. Then I pulled on boxers and a t-shirt and went to the kitchen to make coffee, leaning against the counter and watching the coffee brew. I wondered if this activity was really enough to make Lindsay go into labor. I thought she was in the shower now, her cervix was dilating, and she was feeling contractions. I was sure I would find out if something started happening. I was hoping it would take too long for her. I knew that she was experiencing great discomfort bordering on pain, and more than anything, she needed this baby to be born. At the same time, I found myself hoping that there would still be time for all this. I enjoyed making love to my sister, and I hoped that we could enjoy it again. I heard the shower turn off and gave her a few minutes to take a shower and dry off before going to her place. I made her a cup of strong coffee with cream and sugar and took it to her door. I knocked softly, pushed open the door and saw that she was sitting on a chair by the bed. She was wearing a big fluffy bathrobe, and her hair was tied up in a towel turban. After I saw her covered in fluffy pink fluff, she almost made me laugh, but I quickly came to my senses and handed her a coffee. She thanked me and took a long sip, enjoying the hot, rich, creamy drink, and then put the glass on the table. "Has the baby been born yet?" I joked. She tilted her head to the side, wrinkled her nose, and gave me a sarcastic look. "Not yet." "Take a look for yourself," she replied and opened her robe with a wide gesture. "God, you're damn beautiful," I exclaimed, unable to restrain myself. "Shut up." "I am an airship," she replied, buttoning her robe again and tying it. I knelt down in front of her. "No, listen to me. You're incredible. I know you're big now, but you have no idea how beautiful you are to me. You have always been and always will be like this." I said, "I love you." She just looked back at me. "I love you too," she said at last, "and thank you for helping me. I know it wasn't what you expected from today, but it was fun, wasn't it?" "Of course it was fun. It was incredible," I said. "I hope it works and I'll go into labor tonight," she said quickly before looking away. When I didn't answer right away, she looked up and met my gaze. "Is that right?" she said. "I really hope that you will be able to give birth soon," I told her, "because I know how uncomfortable you are right now, but to be honest, I was hoping that I could help you a few more times." At these words, her eyes sparkled, and she smiled gently. "You can get as much as you want from me," she said and looked into my eyes as if challenging me. I swallowed hard and bent down to kiss her again. Lindsay was great. We were limited in choosing suitable poses because of her huge belly, but it never got boring. It all started as a way to help a child be born, but turned into something all-consuming. "Oh my God," I said, "that was crazy." She just giggled and winked at me before moving closer. Gradually we fell asleep. Brother and sister. Lovers. "I think that's it," she said, holding her stomach and breathing through the pain as the contractions subsided. "I've been getting worse for the last hour or so." "Okay," I stuttered, sitting up and rubbing my sleepy eyes. "We have to take you to the hospital." I jumped out of bed and grabbed a pair of boxers from a drawer, pulled on jeans, and then walked around the other side of the bed to help my sister up. I pulled back the sheets and couldn't resist admiring her beautiful figure again, even though she was lying holding her stomach in pain. I knew it would be over soon, and now my job was to help her in any way I could. Together we managed to turn her over and get her legs off the bed. As I was helping her up, I heard a sound and felt a splash on my feet. I looked down and saw that her waters had just broken. A small puddle of clear liquid formed at our feet, and it flowed down her legs. I quickly grabbed some loose t-shirts to dry her off, then helped her put on her panties and sweatpants before we headed to the car. The next 30 minutes flew by in a blur, as we rushed to the hospital to be examined. I was terrified that the baby would be born on the way, and my heart was almost jumping out of my chest. My mind was racing while my body was on autopilot. We arrived at the hospital without any problems, and we were quickly escorted through the waiting room and finally into the delivery room. Around the time the nurse came in and checked the preliminary vital signs, Karen called. She had just arrived home ahead of schedule and was worried about our departure. I berated myself for not calling her as soon as we went to the hospital, but all I could do now was tell her what was going on. She promised to come to the hospital as soon as she could. I looked at Lindsay. She was coping with another contraction while the nurse connected various tubes and wires. I saw that she now had a blood pressure cuff on her left arm, and something was dripping into a vein on the same arm from an foredrip. I walked around the other side of the bed to give the nurse a little more room to work. I moved closer to Lindsay and began gently stroking her hair. The nurse looked at me and smiled. "She's doing great. Is this your first child?" "What is it?" she asked. I smiled back at her and nodded. I didn't even think how that would sound to someone who wasn't in our situation. She probably assumed that I was her husband or boyfriend, at least that I was the father. I didn't want to correct her or go into details. In fact, I really felt like I was becoming a father in a way. Lindsay, Karen, and I would have raised this child. We all loved each other and would have started a family one way or another. The nurse left us alone for a while, and I pulled a chair closer to the bed. The contraction stopped, and Lindsay looked at me. She looked amazing. Even with her hair disheveled and her face flushed from exertion, she was beautiful. I asked if I could get her something, but she told me to just stay with her. I assured her that I wasn't going anywhere. We stood there for almost an hour. Her contractions were getting stronger and stronger, and it was getting harder to push through. She took my hand and squeezed it, overcoming the pain. After particularly strong contractions, she was breathing heavily and began to cry. She told me she didn't think she could do it. She was scared. Not because of the pain, but because of the life we were thrown into. Caring for a newborn baby. She had another human life on her conscience. I assured her again that she was not alone. Karen and I will always be there for you, and we were in this together. She looked at me with wet, reddened eyes and said in a trembling voice, "What if you meet someone else? You're going to get married. You and Karen will both find other people and leave me. I'm going to be all alone, raising a child. I can't do this." She covered her face with her hands and began to cry. I was sitting there looking at this incredible woman, and my heart was breaking from the pain she was experiencing. I hugged her and didn't let go for a long time until she calmed down, burying herself in my shoulder. Finally, when her crying subsided, I pulled away from her and lifted her face to look into her eyes. "Lindsay, I can't speak for Karen, but I'm not going anywhere." I said, "I love you. You're my sister, and I've always loved you." It's true, but not only that. I realized something last week. You are exactly what I want in life. I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you and start a family. She raised her eyes and looked at me, and then pulled me to her and kissed me with a long and passionate kiss. More than anything, I wanted to hug her, comfort her, and show her how much she meant to me, but I needed to say more. I slowly pulled away and looked into her eyes again. "I love you so much. I want to be with you, but I'm worried about what it will do to Karen if she accepts this new relationship," I said, and then hesitated, waiting, looking into her eyes. She just nodded, as if encouraging me to continue. "I love Karen too. I never realized how deep my love for both of you was until last week. Something has awakened in me. I want to be with both of you." I braced myself for her reaction. I expected her to get angry, to feel rejected or offended, but I could not foresee what would happen next. She just smiled and pulled me back to her for an even more passionate kiss. There was a hunger in her that I felt, and a need to be loved. The door to the room opened and a nurse came in. We quickly pulled away from each other, as if we had been caught doing something illegal, and it was just in time. Karen was right behind the nurses. She ran into the room, seemingly unaware that Lindsay and I were standing too close. Throwing her purse on a side chair, she hurried to the bed, bent down and hugged her younger sister. I watched from the other side of the bed as my two sisters hugged, their bodies pressed against each other. Karen was wearing tight jeans that accentuated her ass and legs. She was wearing a short leather jacket over a black V-neck t-shirt. Her dress was down, and I could smell her across the bed. She smelled faintly of shampoo and perfume, but with a subtle hint of sweat. Karen straightened up and sat on the edge of the bed next to Lindsay. They were talking. Lindsay told her about a million details that I apparently didn't know about. I told them that I would leave them alone for a few minutes and I would go down to the cafeteria and get a couple of carbonated drinks. Before heading to the cafeteria, I went to the bathroom and rinsed my face with cold water. I looked at myself in the mirror and wondered if I was crazy. My younger sister was preparing for the birth of a child. Our lives were about to change forever, and here I am, in the bathroom, struggling with a hard-on at the thought of using my sisters. No, I wasn't crazy. It was just a new chapter in our lives, and no matter how crazy it was, I thought we'd make it work. I left the bathroom and went in search of an elevator that would take me back to the first floor. I found a cafeteria, picked up 3 bottles of Coca-Cola, and was looking at a counter with a variety of chips and energy bars when I received a message from Karen. "Come back here now. The baby is coming soon." It read. I dropped everything I was doing and rushed back upstairs. When I entered the room, I was surprised by the change in the atmosphere. The calm reunion of the sisters that had been a few minutes ago was gone. There were 2 nurses, a doctor, and someone else tinkering with some equipment. Karen stood off to the side, at the head of Lindsay's bed, and held her hand. Lindsay's face was red and she was breathing heavily. I watched as one of the nurses flipped the switch. With a loud groan of a mechanical engine somewhere under the bed, the mattress began to shift, lifting the backrest higher. Lindsay took a more sedentary position. Another nurse was removing some kind of device from the foot of the bed and installing something like raised footholds and then helping Lindsay to get into the right position. As I walked across the room, I looked and saw that her hospital gown was open from the waist down, but no one seemed to be particularly worried about modesty right now. I knew it was the wrong time and place, but my first thought was that she looked beautiful, even with a big pregnant belly. I couldn't help but stare at her thick pubic hair. I'd been making love to this girl for the last week, but I was still surprised by the abundance of hair I saw. I stared at this sight as if mesmerized. Then, in an instant, I heard someone talking to me. It was the doctor. I was in his way, and he had to do something else before she started pushing. Confused, I looked up and saw that Karen was looking back at me. I moved to the headboard on Lindsay's other side and looked at Karen. It was a crazy situation, but we were all together. To be honest, what happened next was a blur of sights, sounds, and emotions. Fear. Pain. Anticipation. Joy. More pain. It was a hurricane. I wouldn't be surprised to know that it's only been a few minutes or that hours have passed. I held Lindsay by one hand and Karen by the other. In the end, it was the closeness of the family that gave Lindsay the strength she could draw from. She tried and breathed. And again I tried and breathed. We supported her. Encouraged her. Praised her. Finally, this moment has come. She was getting weaker. She was just exhausted physically and mentally. But after another powerful push, the baby's head finally appeared. I managed to get a step closer and take a good look, but there was no time to stop. The doctor pierced a hole in the baby's placenta and directed it outward. One last tug, and the shoulders released the birth canal, and the baby slipped into the light of day. In the middle of a mess of blood and liquid, which I first saw in my little niece. She was so small, wrinkled and dark red and purple in color. I had never seen a birth before and was immediately afraid that she had died. But with a couple of quick movements, the doctor used a small suction device and pumped the liquid out of her mouth and nose. Her lungs instantly filled with air, and she made a high-pitched sound, which soon turned into an intermittent cry. I realized that I was holding my breath too. I relaxed and looked at Lindsay. She was breathing heavily and smiling. I watched as the doctor handed the baby over to the nurse, who quickly cleaned up most of the dirt and then, opening Lindsay's hospital gown, put the little girl against the young mother's chest, pressing her skin against it. Karen and I beamed at our younger sister and newborn niece, enjoying the moment. Then I was surprised to hear the word, Dad. I looked around and saw that the doctor was handing me a strange pair of scissors and asking me if I wanted to cut the umbilical cord. Again, this was not the time to argue about the details of the origin, so I took them and followed his advice. Then I went back to my sister. Looking at this pure image of a mother and child, I was overwhelmed with love for my sisters. I looked back and met Karen's eyes. We just looked into each other's eyes for a long time. I don't know if she understood what I was thinking or not, but at that moment, I realized more than ever before that I wanted this to continue and that the next time we were here, I would have a child that I would put into one of these women. End.